Hello! Today I have a podcast for you. I will tell you what the Talmud, the second most important Jewish book after Torah, says about the approach toward Christians. Let's start by noticing that the Talmud is not a holy book like the Bible or the Torah, but a commentary on the holy book. It developed over centuries as a collection of particular rules about how to behave in everyday life. Many of the rules contained in the Torah were impossible to follow 1000 years after its writing. Many were also unclear to the believers, so they asked their rabbis for interpretation. And it was the collection of interpretations of Torah collected over centuries and written down in Jerusalem around 400 CE and in Babylon around 500 CE that gave the rise to the Talmud. Later, even in the Middle Ages, rabbis added additional books that were part of this monumental work, the Talmud. You might be a bit surprised why the most important part of the Talmud was written in Babylon, but Babylon was one of the most important centers of Jewish population since the 6th century BCE. Later, when the Romans imposed various repressions on the Jews, many of them fled to Babylon as well. An important element contained in the Talmud is the attitude of Jews toward non-believers, known as gentiles. The advice contained therein was so offensive to Christians that immediately after its composition it was banned and persecuted. Already in the mid-6th century AD, Justinian the Great forbid the reading of the Talmud in his empire, and in 13th century Pope Gregory IX included the Talmud on the list of the forbidden books. The Catholic Church removed it, in fact, but in 1962. It is worth noticing that Gregory's Ninth Act was a reaction to the activities of Jewish thinkers who, in the 12th and 13th century, wrote numerous new commentaries that became the part of the Talmud and were particularly sketching toward Christians. So, what is about the Talmud that it has continued to infuriate Christians for centuries? I would like to emphasize that I'm providing these quotes only for educational purpose. First of all, it's important to realize that Jews viewed the life of Jesus of Nazareth completely differently than the Christians. The latter saw him as a son of God and a great teacher who came to earth to save humanity. For Jews, however, Jesus of Nazareth is a heretic who managed to seduce many Jews and lead them away from the true faith. Therefore, you may read advice such as, "If you pass by a cross and get a splinter in your foot or spill money, do not stop to take it out or pick it up. You might appear to be bowing to this idolatrous symbol." The Talmud repeatedly mentioned that any act that would connect you with the impure Christianity is a grave sin for a Jew. Jews would not enter churches, participate in Christian holidays, or bow to the clergy. However, there are exceptions to these recommendations, which I will discuss later. The life of Jesus, for example, is described as follows. There was a Yeshu who practiced witchcraft and persuaded people to apostate. for his actions, he was sentenced to stoning. The sentence was carried out for 40 days because Yeshu had some mysterious connections in the city authorities. Finally, he was executed with his disciples. Later, the condemned bodies were hanged. There are also sentences reached in contempt for Christians. When a Jewish woman comes out of the bathhouse and sees a pig, a dog, or a Christian, she must return and wash again. Or even bluntly, they are worse than dogs. They are bred like animals, and their souls came from the devil. Or, Christians are beasts, created in human likeness to serve the Jews, and from this obligation they cannot be released in any way. However, no matter how you say it, the faith of the Jews is very closely linked to the faith of Christians. And throughout these 2000 years of coexistence, Jews had to somehow cope with this they so deeply dislike. In this context, the Talmud contains many messages about how to avoid impurity related to this. Never eat bread baked by a Gentile, or drink milk milked by one. Or, when you buy a knife from a Gentile, first polish it very well and then drive it into the ground 10 times to purify it. There were also special rituals for purifying a clay vessel purged from the Gentile. However, as I mentioned at the beginning, the Talmud is a monumental work created over hundreds of years. Therefore, in fact, it contains a multitude of contradictory statements. Elsewhere, we read that Jews should always be righteous and not harm or defraud anyone, even if they are Gentiles. Furthermore, there are many commandments that are conditional, meaning you shouldn't usually do this, but if it would benefit our community, then do it. For example, many Jews were doctors. Therefore, the question was asked to the rabbis: can one treat a Gentile on Sabbath? The answer: it cannot be done unless such an act would significantly benefit the Jewish community. In this case, it will be allowed. The Talmud also provides an interesting description of the Sabbath, a holy day on which the pious Jew is prohibited from performing any work, including cooking or lighting a fire. While in Egypt or Israel such a commandment was quite easy to fulfill, what should one do in cold Poland, where winters are long and frosty? How can one fulfill the commandment contained in the Torah? The Jewish rabbis come up with an idea. Make a Gentile to do things for you that you cannot do on Sabbath. A Gentile is already impure and cannot count on salvation. And so arose the tradition among European Jews of having Sabbath Goyim, that is, poor Christian who did everything for Jews on Sabbath that the Torah forbade them to do. In summary, the Talmud is very often demonized as a book in which Jews despite the entire world and excel themselves above everyone else. Yes, such paragraphs are there, but they are only a few in these thousands of pages of instructions how to behave. And in fact, one could similarly find such a quotes in Bible or in the Quran. Extracting certain sentences from these books and presenting them as a manifestation of hostility towards others. It is natural for humans to strengthen the sense of bonds within their own group at the expense of other groups. This is what political parties, football teams and their clubs, and as well Jews, Christians and Muslims do. This is in our psychology, shaped over thousands of years, when strong bonds within a group were crucial for surviving of the community. So they were built by every possible means, including contempt and denigration of the other groups. This should be kept in mind when analyzing ancient writings. Moreover, in my opinion, it's not the holy book that matters most, but the human being. In every religion, there are wicked people who will use the scripture for evil, as well as wonderful people who will use it for good. Thank you very much for your attention. Subscribe. This is Ziemowit about history.